but a little bit more about propaganda, because it's very effectively used in the United States, even though we have a lot of independent instruments like alternative radio, like KGNU and other campus community radio stations in the United States, internet sites, and the like. But for propaganda to be really successful, it has to be transparent. It can't be as it was in the old Soviet Union, because in the old Soviet Union, Soviet citizens knew, whatever the state was saying, the opposite was true. So if the state was saying there was a record grain harvest, they know, oh, there's going to be a food shortage this year. There may be a famine. We better store our, food. That kind of thing. Or if, the Soviet Union was exporting X amount of goods, they know there must be a trade deficit now. So it was very easy to translate, opposite. I'm sure the same thing happens in North Korea, Syria, other states where there is a heavy intervention. But in democratic societies, as Chomsky has pointed out numerous times, it is difficult to use the bludgeon. It's difficult to use the stick on the population. You simply can't beat people up for saying, I don't agree with you. And so here, that is to say, in countries like the US and Canada, it's a much more sophisticated, organized system of kind of mind control. At least that's the effort. And kind of the godfather of this industry is someone named Edward Bernays. I don't know if that rings a bell with people. Oh yeah, sure. Edward. I knew him. I went bicycling with him, cross-country skiing. I think he's from Red Deer, if I'm not mistaken. Edward Bernays is actually a two-time nephew, a double nephew of Sigmund Freud. And I don't even know how that works out. I guess cousins married uncles or something. But he is regarded as the literal father of propaganda. And the term actually is it's a Latin word that goes back to the 15th or 16th century when the Pope at the time, whose name escapes me, I think it was one of the Leos, but there were so many Leos, who can keep track? It was one of the Leos, and he was very worried about Martin Luther and the Reformation and this new Protestant Christianity that was coming up. So he was sending out propagandists, they call them propagators of the faith, to make sure that people did not lose their Catholicism and succumb to this new subversive Lutheranism. And so that's where the term actually comes from. It gets a very bad connotation in the 1940s for obvious reasons. But Edward Bernays was a member of the Creel Commission, that is the Committee on Public Information. Again, a very innocuous sounding name. We're all for public information. What was its task? It was created by Woodrow Wilson, who was regarded as a great liberal president in the United States. After he was elected in 1916 on a platform of keeping the United States out of the war that was raging in Europe. But that wasn't his intention at all, because he was under tremendous pressure, surprise, surprise, from the financial and banking institutions in New York, because at the time it looked like Germany was going to win the war, and the huge amounts of loans that the New York banks had given to Paris and London would never be paid if Germany won the war. So there was, so this is long before the bailouts of 2008 and 2009 in the United States. It's almost a century ago. And so Wilson created this commission, Committee on Public Information. It had such members as Edward Bernays, Walter Lippmann, who I mentioned earlier, George Creel, who later distinguished himself as being part of the anti-communist witch hunts in the United States. And their job, the job of this commission, was to mobilize the American public opinion to support U.S. intervention in Europe, and to do that how? The way we're seeing it now with war talk around Iran. Demonize the enemy. They're horrible, they're bloodthirsty, they're cruel, they're mean. The infamous image was of a German soldier throwing a baby in the air and bayoneting him. This was very, very common, and there was a demand almost from the population with this almost 24/7 propaganda that the U.S. should, in fact, enter the war, and it did. And those banks got paid off because Germany lost the war and Britain and France emerged as victors. And it was during this period where Bernays and these other people, liberal intellectuals all, by the way, these are not neocons or some kind of, right-wing wingnuts. These are, very decent people who know the difference between a good Merlot and a Chardonnay. The important things. Bernays said the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses, note the vulgar Marxist term here, masses, is an important element in democratic society. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. This is a logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organized. He continues. If we understand the mechanisms and motives of the group mind, it is now possible to control and regiment the masses according to our will without them knowing it. He called this engineering of consent. Lippmann called it the manufacture of consent. And Bernays proposed, then stated, those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. And again, to go back to that formulation from David Hume and John Locke, the options for state violence are somewhat limited in liberal democratic societies. So it's much more important to control the public mind when the gun is not readily at hand. Although I must say, since the Occupy Wall Street movement has developed in the US, we have seen a very militarized and a violent response from the state security forces. This is nothing compared to what happened in the 1960s and 1970s when there were official government campaigns of assassination of the Black Panthers, of the Young Lords, of the American Indian movement, and also campaigns of defamation and subversion by agents provocateurs. This was all under what was called the COINTEL program, a very dark period in US history. We don't know if we're going in that direction again in the States, but just recently, the change you can believe in president signed the Defense Authorization Act, which gives the executive in the US enormous power to suspend civil liberties and also to detain people for up to 2 years without charge, without legal representation, on suspicion of terrorism. Again, a word that is being used very promiscuously in all the media, and caution is, again, advised.